You're listening to The Route, a sports talk podcast. On Facebook.com/The Route 2 and on Twitter at @the_Route 2.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into a special edition of The Route Major League Baseball podcast. Today, a little bit of a different day for The Route. Usually we have our regular show and then our Husker football podcast. Well, today we combine the regular show with the Husker football podcast. Devin Cleach joining me for that one. Be sure to check that one out on our Facebook and Twitter pages, on YouTube, of course, on our new website, theroute2.wordpress.com. And this one, today, we have our Major League Baseball podcast. So 2 podcasts today, but different style. We haven't talked about baseball much, really at all, on a regular show. So I figured, why not bring in 2 of the best baseball knowledgeable people that I know personally in KRNU sports announcer Matt Rigby, and making a return for the second week in a row now from the Daily Nebraskan at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and KRNU, Michael Dixon. Gentlemen, I cannot tell you how excited and thrilled I am to finally have you both on talking baseball, because you both know baseball so well, and to have you both here, it's just phenomenal stuff. I'm excited.
Thanks for having me. Personally, I can't speak as much for Michael, but I know I'm excited because what a long season finally culminated. I mean, that's the thing about being a baseball fan that I was thinking about last week. There's no other sport that they celebrate a division title even as much as they do, because it's a culmination of so many games played in such a long season. So, yeah, I'm excited as well.
Yeah, just incredible.
And baseball, too. It's unbelievable to see each and every year. These guys play 162 games each and every year, and that seems like a lot. Mm-hmm. And no matter what, it seems like every single season it comes down to the final day, the final 2 days, and in
especially
some cases 2 or 3 days after. And after the season. We may not know exactly what's going on fully until Tuesday. Mm-hmm. They had 162 chances to settle all this.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are still talking about it.
Exactly. Just incredible. And speaking of the AL, we're going to just dive right into this and start with the American League. Now, full disclosure right now, we're recording this podcast before everything happens later today in baseball, where it all finally gets decided on who is going to the wild cards, who wins the AL West. So we're going to discuss this as it is right now, the scenarios that are at play, and we'll start with the wild card and the AL West. Texas right now holding the AL West lead. By the way, a team that you and I, Michael, last week talked about. And I don't know, Matt, if you had the Rangers maybe finishing in last place this year, but we both thought the Rangers would be a dumpster fire this year. There was almost nothing there. And now they have a chance to win the AL West, doing it, like a whole bunch of other teams have done this year, like the Cubs and the Astros, worst to first. Well, just unfathomable.
I think I'll start with the division as a whole. I think it's been the most topsy-turvy division that in all of baseball this year. I mean, like, if you take most prognosticators or even any of us 3 in this room and look at what we thought that division would be back in March, I think, we all probably thought Texas, Houston in any order, 4 and 5, and they're probably going to end up 1 and 2. Oakland we thought would be much better. They've been terrible. Seattle we thought would be good. They've been terrible. Yeah. So, that division as a whole has been a little bit haywire. But switching gears to just the Rangers specifically now, I think that it's interesting that the Blue Jays have gotten so much attention, and David Price has gotten so much attention for what he's done for that team, and not taking anything away from them. I mean, they've been fantastic since the deadline. Yeah. But Cole Hamels has given David Price a real run for biggest impact of a player in the American League specifically, of a player that a player's had on his team in the second half. I mean, Hamels has been fantastic for Texas. Yes. And if they slip today, I mean, they've clinched a spot. They're either in a division format or in a DS format or in the wild card format. If they end up being the wild card, I wouldn't want to face Cole Hamels in that one-game playoff if I'm the Yankees. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. The Yankees are for sure in. The teams that are for sure in right now for the American League are Toronto, the Kansas City Royals, and the Yankees. Texas as well, but the question is, where will they fall? Will they be facing another division opponent in what probably will end up being Toronto? Or, depending on how things break out, because there's a lot of scenarios still at play right now for the American League. Will the Rangers end up being the wild card team facing the Yankees, as Matt Rigby just said? And then there's also Houston and the Angels, Michael Dixon, who are also battling Houston right now to try and stay in. All they have to do is win, and they're in. But the Angels need the Astros to lose, and the Angels need to beat the Rangers in order for there to be, I believe, a playoff for the division and the playoff for the wild card, so that way the wild card can have the playoff to face the division.
Well, for the Angels to get all the way in, they would need, obviously they would have to beat the Rangers, but they would need the Astros to lose, and that would give the Rangers the division. So in that situation, the Rangers, it would take, the scenarios are unbelievable, but to me, the most realistic scenario I can see, if I'll make a quick prediction. Of course,
go ahead.
This will all change in 3 or 3.5 hours. But I see the Rangers winning the division just based on the fact that all they have to do is win today or have an Astros loss. And then now they've been counting on that for a couple of days now. But that seems like the most realistic scenario. And if that were to be the case, then of course it would play out between the Angels and the Astros. If the Angels can somehow force that play-in wild card game, if that makes any sense. I don't even know the correct terminology at this point. That game would be played, I believe, on Monday, and I believe it would be played in Houston, if I'm not mistaken.
I haven't read anything on that.
I'm not. The scenarios are so bizarre.
I want to make, just from a probability point, I want to make another point about the Rangers winning the division. So many things have to break, like you just talked about, but then they would also get a chance to, if you will, redeem themselves, because they'd get a play-in game for the division. So they'd have to lose, have an Angels win, and then lose the play-in game as well. So yeah, I'd say if you just ran like a statistical model on the probabilities of this thing, you'd probably bet on the Rangers still winning the division.
Still at least winning the division.
And I think it'll come down to Angels-Astros for the wild card. And that's quite a contrast between those two teams, because you have the upstart Astros as opposed to the star-laden Angels, and it's which team do you want to see if you're the Yankees, or which team do fans want to see in the postseason?
Meanwhile, in New York, the Yankees are waiting and waiting and waiting to try and figure out which AL West team they could possibly face on Tuesday. Meanwhile, there's the chance that we could have a playoff game on Monday for the division or for the wild card, or, I mean, is there a possibility there could even be a playoff game for both? I mean, you have a division playoff game, then you have a wild card playoff game.
No, that's for sure. That's
and then
how
you have another
work.
wild card playoff game.
If it were, this is where it gets ridiculously complicated. Let's go back to Friday evening, where the Rangers had beaten, the night before they had beaten the Angels, and all they had to do was win one game or have one Astros loss to clinch the division. If you look at it, let's say that everything goes just completely, everything's a disaster for the Rangers. They end up getting swept by the Angels, or getting swept in these final 3 games of that 4-game series, if that makes sense, to the Angels, and the Astros sweep the Diamondbacks. Then those two teams would play for the division title on Monday. Not entirely sure whether that game would be in Texas, I know, that game would be in Arlington, I know that for sure. But then if the Rangers were to lose that, then they would play for a spot in the AL wild, or they would play in the AL wild card game. And if they were to lose that, then in hindsight, they would have had 5 games to win one and get to the divisional series, and they would have been unable to do so.
Right.
And it's the shades of 2012 when they did the exact same thing and completely botched that series in Oakland, and ended up losing the division on the final day of the game, or final day of the year, and then losing that wild card game to the Orioles. What is wrong with these guys when all they have to do is win one game?
It's interesting you use the word botch, too, because I don't know if either of you saw the Angels-Rangers game yesterday.
I was sitting there watching, and
I had actually shut that game off in the 8th inning. I said, okay, I've watched enough. I've seen to the conclusion. And then I checked the score later in the afternoon, and I was like, what happened? What happened in that 9th inning? And so Yeah, it is becoming a botch for Texas, but they're in.
They just need to, they made
in
the
either
playoffs.
way, right? And that's an accomplishment in
and of
itself
yep.
for the Rangers this year, because like we talked about, 5 minutes ago, who had Houston, who had Texas, and it's been funny.
Both of them, yeah.
It's been funny even to watch the storylines follow the Astros along with their path as a team over the last month, because it went from us taking a long time to buy into them as a playoff team to then for weeks it being almost a formality, to then in the last 2 weeks we shifted, or really the whole month of September, to just saying, oh, let's put this in perspective. They had a good year and stuff like that. So that's kind of what it's become for Texas and Houston, if neither of them secures a series, because that's what you're playing for. You want an entire series. If neither of them secures that, I think we'll all kind of step back and say, well, none of this was expected for either of them anyway, and they're both obviously set up well for the future.
Yeah.
Both of those teams will be around for a while.
Yeah, and I think it's also been interesting. They made the allusion or alluded back to late July. I actually went to a pair of Rangers-Yankees games in Arlington, and one of those was a 21-5 Yankees victory, and that was right before the Cole Hamels trade, and that put the Rangers about 8 games back in the division, and that to me was the nail in the coffin for the season. For the Rangers in 2015, but the AL West in and of itself has just been a bizarre and unpredictable division from the start. Of course, you had my boys, the Mariners, coming into the year as the preseason favorite, and they have been nothing short of a disaster. But you've also got the Astros, who opened eyes with that either a 10 or 11 game winning streak early in April, and which included a 4-game sweep of the Mariners. And I was sitting talking regression, right? I did not want to buy into the Astros. I did not want to believe that they could do what they've been doing. And in reality, the only difference between the Astros and being a 500 team is that stretch, that week and a half in April. But that's maybe flawed thinking to some people. I think of it as that way. To me, the Astros aren't anything more than a 500 team, but they've at least kept themselves above the water for long enough to force game 163.
With the pieces that they started with and then added at the trade deadline. Let's not forget that.
It's interesting that you bring up the theory of regression behind, let's say, the Astros, because I think that's a perfect team to talk about it with, because if we move this discussion forward into how do you win in October, I think it's almost unanimous. You all think starting pitching wins. Like if you look at the NL, the 5 lowest staff ERAs are the 5 teams that are going to the playoffs. So, if you look at the Astros, you're like, okay, well, why have they regressed? It's because their pitching's regressed. And then you start to wonder, well, are they even really that good? Could they hang around in a 5-game series? I know a lot of people are behind Keuchel for Cy Young in the American League, which is something we might touch on later. But the reason they've fallen apart in September, and the reason it's magnified the fact that they might only be in this position because they had an 11-game winning streak, is because their starting pitching has totally fallen apart. Yeah. And if you look at advanced stats, it says, okay, their ERA might have been low for a while, but they weren't keeping the ball in the ballpark as a pitching staff. Strikeout numbers were low. Even Keuchel is not a strikeout pitcher. So it's almost predictable. This is what we thought the Astros were. So I don't know if they could even hang around in a 5-game series, which is a ways away.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about, and I do think the same for Texas too. I think that the AL West, no matter who wins, is going to struggle in that divisional series, just because they're going to have to play either the Blue Jays or the Royals, and both of those teams, I think, are light years ahead. But
they are.
It is October, and it's more about who's hot rather than who's good, and we'll see exactly how that plays out over these next couple of weeks, because you look at what the Giants did last year.
Oh yeah,
and even what the Royals did last year. They had no business winning that wild card game, and then they make it to Game 7 of the World Series.
Both teams, the Royals and the Giants, barely make it into the wild card, and then boom, we've got a World Series matchup between the two.
It's a good point too to even talk about the Giants, I guess, because I just said that Houston lacks starting rotation depth, but the Giants did it all with one pitcher
with one guy.
So
one guy.
It could happen, and I guess that's a salient point to realize that once it's all about getting in baseball when it comes to the playoffs. And this is a crapshoot tournament, and
who can avoid those crazy scenarios that go against them? Because the Oakland A's, the Texas Rangers, they're very familiar with those scenarios where they end up getting into them. Crazy stuff happens, and they're done. Same thing with the National League. I think back to 2008, Chicago Cubs, best team in the National League that year, 97 wins, swept by the Dodgers. Immediately
Ramirez and the Dodgers.
Done with the postseason.
Well, and it is also
one of those crazy scenarios.
It is also circumstantial, like you talked about. I mean, I think you're alluding to the A's, and that's, or even the Pirates are about to play in a wild card game for the third straight year. You'd like to avoid those circumstances, and you start to think again, and I'll switch it to the Rangers here. You start to think about, let's say the Rangers played in the wild card game. What do you need? Like, if you're the Royals last year, why did you beat the A's in the wild card game? We had a better bullpen. The Rangers bullpen looked terrible yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know they've had the lowest bullpen ERA of any team in the AL since the break, but they are so taxed right now. They've been used way too much down the last 2 weeks of the season. So if they got into that circumstance where they had to play in a wild card game, they wouldn't be doing what you just alluded to, avoiding situations that just make it tough on you.
And I think experience. Well, let me ask you guys this: you think experience plays into that? Because half of these teams, in fact, almost all of these teams, at least on the AL side, they don't have a lot of postseason experience. The Rangers, I mean, with Cole Hamels, yes, but a lot of other guys, as far as pitching goes, at least for the Rangers, there's almost nothing there. There's almost nothing on the Astros. There's almost nothing on the Yankees. The Angels, if they make it in, they have a little bit more. The Blue Jays have almost nothing in terms of postseason experience. The only team that does is the Kansas City Royals, believe it or not, with that huge run they had last year. So do you guys buy into, and you could even throw it in to the National League side with the Cubs, with the Mets, do you guys buy into the experience factor when it comes into the postseason?
I think you have to. You look at guys that it doesn't really matter who they are. It's just what they are in the postseason. And a guy that comes to mind is a guy like Carlos Beltran. I think that is a perfect example of the idea that postseason experience can play a huge factor and does play a huge factor in productivity in those scenarios. But, I mean, the Royals do have some experience. The Yankees are the Yankees. I don't think the Yankees are ever going to necessarily be considered an inexperienced organization based on who they are.
Yeah.
The Blue Jays are darn good, but the Rangers, when you look up and down that roster, there are still a lot of guys that are still on that roster from 2010 and 2011, or that they brought back that were on that team.
Beltre, right?
So I think Beltre was on there, and then you've got Elvis Andrus, a guy like Mike Napoli played some big outs.
Prince Fielder has some postseason experience too.
Josh Hamilton, same way. So there's a lot of really good. At least guys that have experience.
Leadership.
Exactly. That were there in 2010 and 2011 that have been down this road and were down that excruciating road when they played the Cardinals in the World Series. But, I do think that experience plays a big factor.
It's such an interesting question because it's the immeasurable. How do you measure what experience does for a team in the playoffs? And I read an interesting piece, Jeff Sullivan wrote it, couple days ago, I think it was, talking about the Blue Jays prospects going forward. And he said, if you look at the Blue Jays in the second half, they have almost no flaws. They're the best team in the AL on paper. They're the hottest team in the AL on paper. And the only thing that you can't really say they are is experienced in the postseason. And whether, because a lot of Blue Jays naysayers would say, well, give me some backing on that. What does that mean? Why are Blue Jays fans, who are casting doubt to that point would say, well, what does that mean for this, blah, blah, blah. And the fact of the matter is it means something. It means something to have been in games, what do they call them, close and late, seventh inning or later, 2-run lead or less. And
it's a possible weakness that could hurt you as the postseason progresses.
Right. I mean, because the Blue Jays just flat don't have the pedigree. And, I mean, I'm a Mets fan. You're a Cubs fan. I'm sure you're terrified of it. We're going in with young teams that have never been there. I mean, I saw something the other day. They put a graphic up in the Mets game during the Mets game, postseason games played, and I think Bartolo was third with 10 on the roster. I mean, which is 2 series, which was probably a couple years ago when he was in Oakland.
Yeah.
So, and Bartolo,
or with the Angels,
right? And he's been in the league forever, and to still think that he only has played in 10 playoff games is like, man, a lot of people don't get there, and then a lot of people get there repeatedly, like say anyone who's played for the Cardinals.
Yeah.
And I think they have an advantage in that regard.
And that's the interesting thing is there are some teams where it does not matter if they have postseason experience or not, like the Cardinals. It doesn't matter. They are just playing the game of baseball. They're playing to win. It doesn't matter to them if it's the World Series or if it's the middle of June. They're playing to win. And I think that's the mentality that you have to have in the postseason for Major League Baseball is you can't be concerned about the atmosphere that's in. All you have to be concerned about is playing the game of baseball in a manner that gets you a win.
I spent probably about a year as a sports fan a couple years ago trying to convince myself that you could only pay attention to the measurable, that could be quantified, you know, and I've had to succumb to the idea over really the last year that there are elements to sports, every single sport, and baseball might be the grandest example of any sport where there are elements that you just can't measure and you just can't explain. And obviously postseason experience is one of those elements where because why else would we look at every other year the Giants win inexplicably? You know, they don't have the roster, but like Bruce Bochy pulls a magic rabbit out of his hat, you know, or why do the Cardinals win 100 games with a roster that's been decimated by injuries? Well, because they have experience at doing that. And so, you know, I've had to buy into that. And I think that those are things that are, it's totally plausible, for example, that we could see the Royals and the Cardinals in the World Series, despite people thinking that maybe they're not the two best teams, and it could be solely based off them having the greatest amount of experience in their respective leagues.
Absolutely. Michael?
I agree 100% with that idea that the intangibles are as important as the tangibles, and when it comes to the postseason, that is never more apparent. The Cardinals are an organization that comes to mind. You touched on it. What that organization does, hate them as much as you want. And God, I'm sick and tired of hearing about the St. Louis Cardinals. I don't hate the Cardinals. I don't have anything against the Cardinals other than the fact that I'm just sick and tired of hearing about them.
It's just not a new, fresh team like the Blue Jays.
Exactly. Or the Rangers to a certain extent or something like that.
The Astros.
The Mets. All these teams, there's so many better stories in baseball this year than the St. Louis Cardinals. But that you cannot take away what that organization does each and every year. Their player development is absolutely phenomenal. From the top down, that organization is so unbelievably well run, and it reflects each and every single year. They've been to the NLCS 4 years in a row, won a couple at least won a World Series championship in 2011, and it's no joke because they just know how to win, and that's. There's no better way to explain it than they know how to freaking win.
I think it magnifies itself for me watching a team that knows how to lose, like I did for so many years.
Yeah, with
the Mets know how to lose, and there's a thing that like they don't only know how to lose, they know how to lose in the most painful way possible. And it's almost like 2007, 8,
2008,
those were two collapses. And it's almost like innate in them to lose. And it's funny that we bring up the Cardinals because my disdain, if you will, for the Cardinals stems from 2006 when the Mets were the best team in the NL. The Cardinals were really like they barely got in. They had
was that the Andy Chavez year?
Yeah, when he made the catch in Game 7. Yeah, they had a losing record in September, but like you could feel it from Game 1 of that series, and whether it's the La Russa effect, whether it's the Cardinal way that annoys all of us, no matter what it was, you could feel it from Game 1 that like, oh no, the worst is going to happen here. I mean, the same thing happens to me in football. I mean, I'm a Broncos fan, and I know when the Broncos-Patriots game happens every year, the Patriots are going to win. They're just going to find a way, and it's almost like fated, preordained, if you will.
Kind of like this season for Nebraska football.
Right,
if there's a way for the Huskers to lose, it will happen. Overtime, Hail Mary, late comeback with less than a minute to go. It's just that's how it is. Let's get into possible, or at least I guess, teams that we think will advance, and I guess who we think will end up being the World Series teams to get there. Let's start first with this wild card matchup. Let's go with the fact right now that Angels, lose to Texas today and the Astros win their game?
Well, as much as we talked about it,
right.
What usually happens is the standings will stand pat. So yeah, we could probably pretend that that'll happen anyway.
Who knows? But let's go with that. So Astros and Yankees, this game in New York. Now the Astros went to New York, I think in August, the beginning of August, and just tossed the Yankees around like toys. Does this happen again, or is it going to be a different atmosphere, a different situation for the Yankees? Michael, you're shaking your head. Yeah.
I'm really, really, really worried about the New York Yankees because I thought they overperformed or were overachieved. I thought they were a bit of an overachieving bunch throughout the year, and I think we talked about how it's almost who's hotter rather than who's better. The Yankees are not hot right now, and for a long time, everyone was sure whoever that second wild card or whoever got that mess of teams that was going to try to get to that second wild card, they were going to have to go to New York to play a game. That's not even necessarily true coming into the last day of the year. So I'm worried about the Yankees, very worried about the Yankees, but at the same time, I'm not sure I can buy fully into the Astros. And we've talked about intangibles. I like the Yankees getting past that wild card game, no matter who they are, no matter who they end up playing, because they're the Yankees.
We talked about a little bit off air before, when I first got here, about home field and its effect in the playoffs. And I would argue that there really isn't an effect, but this is the one case where I'm going to talk about home field because I think the Yankees are built to win only in Yankee Stadium. I mean, like they stack 9 hitters all from the left side, and they shoot for that short porch with, I don't know, what is it, 250 feet? It's like a little league field.
It's 310.
Right, I'm being facetious.
But it seems like 250.
It's ridiculous.
Right. And so it's funny that that's not a given yet. I would imagine that game will be played in Yankee Stadium, but it's possible that it won't be. If it is, I like the Yankees, and I'm on board with Michael as far as, man, the Yankees look terrible right now. They're decimated with injuries. No one on that staff seems to be able to pitch right now. Tanaka got rocked last week. Nobody knows the state of his elbow. He had the leg problem. I think it was a calf. Pineda, every other start is a mess. CC has a batting average against of 305 against righties. You can't pitch him.
Yeah, Sabathia is not the Sabathia of old.
Right, and so I don't even know who would start that game for the Yankees. But
supposedly it's been announced that Tanaka will start.
Tanaka, yeah. And I guess the point was I don't even know if he'll pitch effectively. But if the game's in Yankee Stadium, and again, I mean, you almost have to talk about intangibles in a one-game situation. Girardi's such a good manager, and it's the Yankees' pedigree that I could see them winning it because, they have a Beltran from the left side who can hit a home run. They have A-Rod, I mean, we all hate him, but A-Rod could, he's had a great season. He could hit 2 home runs or something in a wild card game situation like that. So if it were Yankees-Astros, it'd be interesting to, like I said, see where the game's played, but it'd also be interesting to see what Keuchel does because he shut the Yankees down twice this year.
Yes.
So that could be the X factor as well from the Houston side.
Which could be a benefit if the Astros end up being the home team. And I think the Astros own that tiebreaker with the Yankees in terms of matchups.
I believe they do, yes. So if that ended up as a tie, it'd be Houston.
So if the Yankees do lose and the Astros win and the Rangers beat the Angels, so then the wild card is in Houston, the Astros host. I think the Astros win that game. I think the Astros might win that game regardless, wherever it's played.
Right. I mean, let's not take anything away from the Astros' home run prowess. The Yankees have lived and died by the home run this year, but really so have the Astros. I mean, they're built from a very sabermetric slant to hit a lot of home runs. They strike out a lot, but that's their game. And so the Astros wouldn't be affected by going into Yankee Stadium either. I mean, they have a lot of guys who have a lot of pop as well. So, I mean, it could be one of those games where, and I almost am hesitant to say this because Keuchel would be on the mound, but it could be a game where it's like 9-8, you know, and it just turns into a total bullpen affair or something.
It's been that way a couple of times for the Astros this year.
It has. And we talked about, or we both alluded to avoiding circumstances and finding the easiest path to resistance, if you will, in the playoffs is kind of the key, and not wanting to inject bullpens into your life in the playoffs, but that's what a one-game situation usually comes down to.
Absolutely.
And the reason I would probably lean towards the Yankees in that one-game situation is because of their bullpen.
Yeah.
I mean, if the Yankees hit the 8th inning with the lead, and I know Betances has been a little bit shaky this week, but I look at the larger sample size and still trust him. If the Yankees enter the 8th inning with the lead and they throw Betances in the 8th and Miller, and then I think it's over.
Yeah, I agree. And again, they're the Yankees, but you look at that infield. It's like Bird, and then you've got Stephen Drew and Didi Gregorius, and then Blake Headley. You wonder how that
Chase Headley.
Chase. I covered Nebraska baseball for 2 years in a row. That takes its toll on you, but so you look at that infield and you wonder how in God's name that infield could play. A team with that infield could get to the divisional series. But it's just bizarre. The postseason is bizarre. I agree 100% that with that bullpen conjecture that especially when you compare it to the Astros, who have the second half of their season, their bullpen has just been atrocious. Yeah, I like the Yankees. Partly because they're the Yankees, though. I just want to go on record as saying they're the Yankees. Nothing phases them just based on what they stand for.
The interesting thing, though, is if this game is in Houston, those Astros, they love the Crawford box.
Yeah, the short porch and right is the Crawford box.
And we talked about exactly. The Yankees are built from the left side to play for the short porch. The Astros are built to hit into the Crawford boxes. So, I mean, Valbuena's got like a 190 average with 30 home runs into the Crawford boxes. So,
that's right.
I mean, I think this is the rare case where I would say that, and I'm not talking about fans or anything. This is the rare case where ballpark the way it's designed, ballpark layout
scenarios,
right,
layouts,
could determine the actual outcome of that game if those were the two teams.
Moving on to a couple of the other matchups. So the winner of that game then gets to take on the Kansas City Royals. And both the Astros and the Yankees have done very well against the Royals in the regular season. I think the Astros more than the Royals. But this game is the series, the ALDS, will be in Kansas City. How much does that have as far as an effect goes on whoever plays the Royals? Now, granted, the Royals have looked a little rough coming into September and all throughout and going into October. But that didn't mean anything last year when they went into the postseason and just stormed through all the way to the World Series and then ran into the Giants, which was a wrestling match in itself. Do the Yankees and Astros have an easy time with the Royals in the postseason like they did in the regular season? Michael, I'll start with you.
No, I disagree. I know that matchups are a big thing, and I know that matchups play a big role in regular season series, but I think that once you get to October, most of what happened in the regular season does not matter. And the Astros and Yankees may have played well against the Royals throughout the regular season, but at the same time, the Royals are going to end up winning 94, 95 games, and you can't take that away from them. And you can't take when it comes to home field advantage and just the advantage in general, that why not us factor with the Royals. I don't think you can take that away from them either. They may have the best record in the American League, but they're still surprisingly somewhat of an afterthought. I don't think anyone's willing to give the Royals much of the time of day, really, when it comes to making another run deep into the postseason. But the Royals, they've been quiet. They were helped by the fact that the AL Central was just a disaster from almost day one, it seems like. And
I think outside of the Twins had a very good year.
But in terms of competing with the Royals, there was nothing for a long time.
Absolutely.
It seemed like that division was said and done. And so I don't think you can take that away from the Royals. I think the Royals are just as good as anybody, and I like their chances to make a deep run.
Would you even consider that with the problems they have had with starting pitching lately, where the only guy that really is going out there and getting it done for Kansas City, seemingly, weirdly enough, is Edison Volquez. Johnny Cueto's been roughed up. Chris Young has been roughed up. Yordano Ventura has been pretty good. Not the best, but he has kind of struggled. There's no decent fifth starter in Jeremy Guthrie. Danny Duffy is iffy. I mean, does that maybe play a bit of a factor going into the postseason with the struggles they've had?
Yeah, it's a very valid point. And, yeah, I think there is somewhat of a worry there, and especially surrounding a guy like Cueto, where you give up some players at the deadline to make sure that you have a guy you can count on throughout September and August, September, and October. And they thought they were going to get that with Johnny Cueto. They haven't yet. So that is a bit concerning. But, no, I still think that the Royals are going to be just fine. I think part of that may have been, I don't want to bring in an issue of concentration, but when we talked about the Mariners this year, a lot of people looked at not how bad Felix Hernandez was, but how human Felix Hernandez looked, and a lot of people attributed to the fact that from the get-go, the Mariners just they weren't in it. They weren't in either division race or in the division race. They really weren't in the wild card race, and there was a concentration issue. There's a potential that there was some concentration issues when it comes to the Royals, just based on the fact that you run out. You have in some instances a 10-game lead in the NL Central or in the AL Central, and you're just kind of going through the motions until October comes. We've been through this before. We just want to get back to where we want to do what we haven't yet done, and that's get that World Series championship. So, yeah, there might be a bit of a concern there, but I'm not enough of a concern to think that the Royals aren't good enough to win the American League.
Matt?
I think the Royals might be the most, for me, intriguing team in the entire postseason, and a lot of people would kind of scoff at that notion because, the Blue Jays are in for the first time in forever. The Mets are in, the Cubs, you look at all the teams that you could root for. But I think the Royals presented something last year, and I talked about it with some people at the time, presented almost like an anti-sabermetric idea or approach to winning, coupled with some very pro-sabermetric approaches to winning. And so, they hit for average, which is totally anti-sabermetric. They have low on-base percentage. They hit for high average, though. They last year they didn't have a lot of pop. They have more pop this year, but still it's not their strength. But they play fantastic defense, and they have a fantastic bullpen. I mean, they got 4 Gold Glovers. From the 7th inning on, I don't know if anyone thinks they can really beat them if they have the lead. And that worked last year. It was almost like Ned Yost ball, you know, and it was a totally different brand than what we had anticipated being successful. And it's so funny because a lot of the forward-thinking analytical projection models or sites or whatever have been really low on the Royals all year. I think at one point in August, they still had the Royals barely going 500 the rest of the year, which actually manifested itself. But the point of that is people have kind of been they're very bearish on the Royals anyway. They haven't bought into them, and yet the Royals are going to be the best, or likely going to be the best record in the American League. And they've still used that same model that got them to the World Series last year to carry that success over into this year. So the reason they carry so much intrigue for me is because I'd like to see if that model is successful in a postseason format again. And I kind of think it will be. I mean, I know you alluded to Michael alluded to a lot of the concerns with the Royals right now. Their starting pitching looks like a tire fire. I heard some Royals fans, because there's a lot of them here, and I kind of do some crowdsourcing of them, and they told me that some of them told me they weren't even comfortable with Cueto pitching at all in the postseason. I mean, obviously he's gonna, but they're afraid of the idea. Was the point? So their starting pitching's bad. Their offense has been in a slump for seemingly a month now. A lot of elements to the offense. They don't have a lot of pop, yada yada. But I still tend to think they'll be fine, because that model manifested itself last year, and it's shown to be successful throughout this season as well.
Something just changes when it becomes postseason time, and we saw that last year with the Giants, with the Royals, 2 second-place wildcard teams going to the World Series.
In a year where so many teams either overachieved or underachieved, the Royals have been consistent from opening day. And a lot of people thought that the Royals weren't going to be good enough to win the American League Central again this year. A lot of people thought they were probably not even a 500 team coming into the year, just like what he said. And but the way that the season's played out, they just continue to play well. They continue to leave very few question marks in their wake, if you will, no matter how much they've struggled throughout these last month or so. And I don't think you can take that away from the Kansas City Royals.
I think the only difference I would draw between these Royals and last year's Royals is that they were, and some people will say that this matters. I'm not sure that it does. But they were playing meaningful games up to the very end last year. And so you talked about the concentration aspect, thank you, of games in September. It's not quite there this year.
There's not a desperation factor.
And so that's really the only difference I can see. I mean, to me, honestly, it looks like the same team. So it's certainly possible that they make a run. And, you know, we opened this by kind of wanting to talk about the matchups. We focused it a little more on the Royals. But if I go back to the matchups, part of the issue is I don't think either of the teams that would let's say it's Astros-Yankees in the wild card game, I don't think either of those teams can win 3 games out of 5 in a 5-game series. No. I just don't. I don't think they have enough pitching. And I know I just made a point about the Royals pitching, but the Royals do so many other things better that kind of makes up for their pitching.
Yeah.
I don't think, I mean, if you're the Yankees, are you sending CeCe to the mound for Game 3? I mean, that if I was a Yankees fan, I wod be terrified of that prospect. I mean, I really would be. I mean, I know, like, they probably won't. Well, maybe they will for Game 4. I mean, they have Tanaka, Pineda, Severino. So that would probably be 1, 2, 3. But if it got to a Game 4 and Sabathia's on the mound, I mean, I don't trust the Yankees winning in that type of format. And we've already talked ad nauseum about how the Astros really we don't think they're as good as they looked through certain parts of the season. So I think that's really part of the issue for the Royals too, is that they could get, I mean, let's contrast this wild card with the NL wild card. You know, like the Cardinals are going to get a tough series no matter what from either the Cubs or the Pirates. I don't think the Royals are going to get a tough series. So I'd be surprised if they didn't sweep that series, really, in the DS. And then you put them in the championship series, they're 4 wins away from the World Series again. So, I mean, I think that's part of it as well.
I want to wrap up the AL by just talking about the Toronto Blue Jays. We haven't gotten to that yet. We've talked enough about the Rangers and the Astros and the Angels and the Yankees, Royals, and the Toronto Blue Jays probably, as both of you said earlier, on paper, the best team in the American League. And I think, at least for me, probably one of the most dangerous teams in the American League. Not just with pitching, not just with offense, but they absolutely have the best home field advantage that I have seen in quite some time. And I know you and I, Michael, talked about this last week. I've never seen the Rogers Center that packed and sounding that unbelievably loud at any point in watching baseball, because the Blue Jays just have never been good since 1993.
Any point in our lives.
Yeah.
Like, we've never seen the Rogers Center that way. We can watch tape of it, but we've never seen it.
And even then, I know obviously a huge Rush fan, and Geddy Lee went on MLB Network a couple days ago, and he said even in 92 and 93, he is a Blue Jays season ticket holder since 1979, humongous Jays fan. He said even in the last, back when they were really darn good and winning the World Series, no one really cared. And for some reason, things have they've just changed. And the culture has changed, and I don't know exactly what it is, but when it comes to the Blue Jays, well, let's take it this way. When it comes to like the Royals, it seems like the entire state of Nebraska is behind the Royals, the entire state of Kansas,
Missouri, half of Missouri,
some of Missouri, a lot of these Midwestern states, they're behind Kansas City. That's it. You've got literally the entire country of Canada behind the Toronto Blue Jays. Even in a place like Vancouver, where they're much closer to Seattle than they are anywhere else, they care about the Blue Jays way more than they do anything else when it comes to baseball. So it's still early in the hockey season to where these Canadians can divert at least some of their attention to baseball, and they can follow these Blue Jays who are exciting, who are well put together, and that is what is driving the Blue Jays right now. And that's one of the things outside of just how good they are that makes them very scary is having to go to Toronto and play baseball games in October. It seems very, very, very daunting. And quite frankly, I think another reason that a lot of people are hoping the Blue Jays pull this off is because very rarely do you see moves at the deadline work. Literally exactly as they're supposed to.
David Price, Troy Tulowitzki.
And for the Blue Jays, that team was good but not great up until the deadline. They addressed exactly what they needed to address, did it efficiently, went all in, completely all in, and for right now, it's looking like it works. And the AL is such... There are so many question marks surrounding the American League that when it comes to the Blue Jays, they seem like the popular pick just because even with inexperience, they're just darn good from top to bottom.
Exactly, yeah.
They're the one team that doesn't seem to have flaws on the actual field.
Yeah.
You know? And, when I knew earlier this week that we were going to do this, Ryan, when you got a hold of me on it, I started thinking about the Blue Jays, and I thought back to when we did a baseball preview, and we previewed the AL East on one of the... I
was going to bring that up earlier with the Astros. I couldn't remember if you were around when Ansley was... Were you around when Ansley talked about the Astros?
Yeah.
And you remember her saying, she listed off those 8 reasons of why the Astros could make the postseason. And I just thought that was the strangest thing because Ansley Sinkbile, the person we made fun of the most on Delay of Game in the spring, ends up having her team literally this close from going to the postseason. It's just crazy.
And I remember we did
AL East,
did an AL East preview on one of the Delay Game shows, and we talked about how volatile the division was, and it kind of played out that way. Nobody knew what was going to happen in the AL East. There were times early in the season when I think every team was separated by 3 or 4 games all the way into like
Red
June.
Sox, everybody was there.
And we sat in this, I think it was this room, and we tried to figure out, okay, why are certain teams going to win? Why are other teams not going to win? And the popular pick was the Red Sox. And I remember asking you the difference between the Blue Jays and the Red Sox. They both seem to have the exact same lineup to me. Neither team seemed to be able to pitch. And I was like, it's a crapshoot. The Blue Jays could certainly win the AL East. Then they go out and so we saw the first half of the season that lineup manifested itself.
Yeah.
Like everyone stays healthy. They've scored 100 more runs than everyone else. Their run differential is...
Pieces came together early, and then it just held.
And then they got
Everything held there.
They got that pitching that they needed at the deadline.
And they
all
got
of a sudden,
they got an offensive upgrade at a key position at shortstop in Tulowitzki.
Right. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, if they had Price all along, this is who we thought the Blue Jays could be. We thought they could
been a 100-win-plus team?
It could have been. I really think it could have been. We thought they would be a team that outscores their opponents by 100-plus runs. And now, and I think this is the X factor to the entire postseason in the American League, the fact that the Astros have added Stroman now, and he's pitching well in an environment where no one thought he would come back this year.
The Blue Jays.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I meant the Blue Jays.
Yeah.
In an environment that no one thought he would come back this year. The Blue Jays look scary to me if I'm another American League team.
Oh yeah, you just don't want to play the Blue Jays. I would much rather play the Royals than the Blue Jays. So I think if I'm that wild card game, I'm hoping that the way today ends up is the fact that I'm having to go to.
If the Rangers win, then Cole Hamels better be on his game facing Toronto.
I don't know how you pitch the Blue Jays. I don't know how you pitch them.
You don't really. You just throw it and hope that they don't hit it 500 miles an hour.
Speaking of Cole Hamels, if you're a left-hander, oh my, you have to pitch from the left side of the mound against Bautista, Encarnacion, Donaldson, Tulowitzki. The list goes on. Russell Martin. The list goes on and on.
He could hit. This sounds totally preposterous. Russell Martin could, in that lineup, and it would almost make sense in the postseason for them to do this, could hit leadoff. And it would be a really effective lineup because I know they've been playing with that leadoff spot. And the Mets had the Blue Jays for 4 games earlier this year, and I got a chance to watch them all. 2 were in New York, and then it was a back-to-back split doubleheader in different parks. And I was befuddled. I didn't know how. I mean, the Mets pitching is dominant. It has been all year, and they couldn't pitch them. I don't know how you do. I've watched multiple Blue Jays games down the stretch just to figure out, okay, what is it about this team? And even like I remember the Royals went up there for a series, which could have been a championship series preview at the time. And
I certainly hope so.
And the Royals, they'd get a run in the first or the second, or they'd be up 2-0. You're like, okay, the tide may settle here. We could be 2-0, 2-1 in the 5th and 6th because that's normal baseball. And the Blue Jays would pounce for like 5 runs in the 3rd on 3 home runs or on the back of 3 home runs. And I'm just like, wow. I mean, this is murderer's row of a lineup. And I mean, we've hit on it so many times. Anything can happen in the playoffs. There's actually an article earlier this week about how being that dominant down the stretch, as dominant as the Blue Jays have been, isn't always correlative to the playoffs. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if we're gonna try and make some prognostications, I don't know how you say anything against the Blue Jays.
Yeah.
And I was glad that Michael brought up the whole deadline thing, because that was something I wanted to hit on today. If you look at the Rangers, the Blue Jays, and the Mets, mm-hmm. I don't remember a year in any of our lifetimes where the trade deadline was so impactful for teams. I mean, usually, the Blue Jays and Rangers were sub 500 clubs mm-hmm. when they made the trades at the trade deadline. The Mets were 2 games over, I think, if I remember.
They were right around there.
Right, and all 3 of those teams totally took off, mm-hmm. and the Blue Jays took off to the point where I don't think any of us hesitate to say that they're the best team in the AL.
I don't know if the Blue Jays have reached their peak yet.
Yeah, they probably have.
That's how good they are right now.
I mean, they've just been absolutely phenomenal these last couple months of the year. And I'm looking right now. You've hit a little bit on advanced statistics, and you can buy into them or you can't buy in, or you don't buy into them. It doesn't really matter. But if you look at Pythagorean win-loss, mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's basically the idea of what you should be based on the amount of runs you score, your mm-hmm. run differential. They're a 103-win team, and that is absolutely no joke. That's a super team mm-hmm. nowadays in baseball. Mm-hmm. And
that's 0-1 Mariners. That's what I think.
Exactly. And 100-win teams are not as frequent as they used to be.
That's very close to the current Cardinals record, or what it could be. If the Cardinals win both of their games today, they're 102 wins.
Yeah, and it seems like the Cardinals' playoff percentage has been, or playoff probability has been 1,000% from opening day. So, so you just really how good the Blue Jays have been with as much as they struggled throughout the first few months. The current post-deadline Blue Jays, I think they're the best team in the American League, and quite frankly, I have a hard time believing they aren't the best team in baseball.
Yeah,
I would second that. I would second that, and I think that, I mean, we saw it in Pittsburgh a couple years ago. What it does to a fan base, and we talked about this. I wanted to just give my 2 cents. What it does to a fan base to have a team in the playoffs that hasn't been in the playoffs for 22 years now, is the Blue Jays run.
I think 22. Yeah,
and if you're curious, you're curious as to what playoff sports look like in Canada, I mean, just go watch like game 1 of a Stanley Cup Finals series or something. There's no teams in Canada that ever make the finals. So of a first round playoff series. Mm-hmm. I mean, those buildings are nuts. Yeah, I mean, Canadians are nuts as sports fans. I'm glad you
brought that up. I was going to say this earlier. It is truly what we're watching with how crazy the noise is in Toronto and how many fans are there. It truly is like a hockey game. Mm-hmm. Put into a baseball game. Right. It is that loud. It is that crazy. It's that, I guess, impactful on the outcome of a game. I think back with the Jays and the Yankees in the final series that those 2 teams had of this season, when Russell Martin hit that 3-run homer to give the Jays the lead, that place... That's still, I vividly remember watching that highlight and just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, that mm-hmm. place is crazy. Unreal. And that's like a hockey atmosphere. And it just fits. It fits perfectly because it's Canada. When you think of Canada, you think of hockey, and you think of how great Canadian hockey is. And then you've got the Toronto Blue Jays doing what they're doing right now. And it's like, man, it's like a hockey atmosphere, but it's baseball.
One other element that kind of gets overlooked to that home field advantage in Toronto, they play on such a quick surface, and they're used to playing on that surface. And I think it affects teams to go into Toronto, unless it's like an AL East team that goes in there 3 series a year, 4 series a year, right? Like, it would affect, I think, the Royals to go into Toronto and have to play on a quicker infield surface because it's much quicker.
Yes.
And I know the Royals are good defensively, but that's a different animal to try and attack.
Oh, yeah.
And the Blue Jays just do it. They've done it 81 times this year. They've played on that surface, so I think they're more used to it.
You could say what Lorenzo Cain is to Kansas City at Kauffman Stadium, Kevin Pillar is to Toronto at the Rogers Center. And if that guy, by the way, does not get a Gold Glove this year, we've got some major problems because Kevin Pillar has been making outrageous plays, not just this year, just last year, for a good few years in a row now. And it's finally being meaningful because the Blue Jays are so
meaningful.
good.
Right. And I think it translates to the infield, too. I know a lot of people focused on the Tulo deal being an offensive upgrade. I think Tulo was a defensive upgrade on the quicker surface as well. I think so, too. And I think the Blue Jays were cognizant of that. I think they want to shore up every aspect of their team, and they did so in kind of some discreet ways. You didn't necessarily think Tulo could be a defensive impact. You didn't think that they would get LaTroy Hawkins and he would be a bullpen impact, but he has been
40-plus-year-old LaTroy Hawkins
with the intangibles that he brings, the quick pitch element and stuff like that. So yeah, we've hit on it so many times. I just don't think the Blue Jays have a flaw. The Sporting News wrote previews for all potential playoff teams or all teams that have clinched, and they did a why they will win it all and a why they won't win it all for each team. And the Blue Jays didn't have a section of why they won't win it all because
they're just so
what's their flaw?
Yes.
What do you pick out?
So of those teams, it sounds like Toronto, we think at least right now, Toronto goes to the World Series.
If I had to pick, I would say that. And I think the matchup will be the Royals because that they would get in the championship series because the Royals are going to probably get an easier division series. I don't think it'll be a walk for the Blue Jays, though. I don't think they'll walk all over Kansas City. I think that experience will play a part. I mean, we touched on that. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if that series went 7. But if it, let's say, goes 7, I'll take David Price in Game 7.
Oh, yeah.
So,
who would?
The Blue Jays are set up very nicely to make a deep run. Quick update, by the way. Game 162, of course, that whole
today's
slogan.
A crazy day.
Game 162, of course, is underway. Cole Hamels gives up 2-run jack to Albert Pujols in the top of the first inning.
There we
go.
go.
There's your update.
So possibly Toronto might be facing who knows who.
I don't even want to start thinking about.
Oh yeah, there's
team entropy has begun.
Oh yes, exactly.
Team entropy has been playing for a couple of weeks now. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yes, that is going to conclude the AL portion of this and this baseball podcast, at least for the AL. We will. We hope you have enjoyed the AL postseason prediction. We will have our NL postseason predictions posted as well, also on the Route Facebook page and Twitter. Facebook.com/theroute2 at @the_route2 and on our website, theroute2.wordpress.com. Matt Rigby, Michael Dixon with me. If you want to hear our NL podcast, click on the other podcast that features the NL. We'll have that posted right next to this one, so be sure to check that one out. Good stuff, gentlemen, and thank you for joining me. And this has been the Route Baseball Playoff Podcast Edition. Check the NL one out. It's pretty good. 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 NL one out.